I'm here today with Ralph Holloway, who's the Head of SEND Strategy and Innovation at Essex County Council, and Janine Hanson, who is the SEND Quadrant Manager for NE Essex, who've come along to speak to parents at our coffee morning today. Thanks both for coming. Ralph, why did you want to come along today?
The main reason for me, Sue, is to be able to hear directly from parents, unfiltered, exactly what their experiences are of the SEND system at the moment in Essex, and particularly in North East, to hear what's affecting their lives, how it's affecting their access for their children to education, and just hearing it in their own voices, really.
That's great. And Janine, you've come along as well today. What were you hoping to hear when you got here?
So similarly to Ralph, I think it was really important for me. So this is one of my first events with directly with families, potentially from North East Essex. And obviously, in terms of the teams that I manage, we are at what you might call the other end of working with families, working directly with schools. And what we often hear is the voice of families, but through paperwork, and that's not always what we want to hear. We want to hear what that looks like in reality for families as well.
And one of the other things that we've developed together is this questionnaire that we're hoping to continue over the subsequent months and years, just to kind of gather information from parents about what their experiences are, so that we've got this really good set of information to share with other services about parents' experiences. So really appreciate you both coming along today to listen to parents. Ralph, you've had a chance to speak to parents this morning. What kind of stories have you heard, and what are your reflections on what you've heard?
So some interesting ones about when's the right time to seek a needs assessment, how confident are parents that one planning is enough, and I guess to a certain extent that depends upon the level of confidence they have in their young person's school. I'll let Janine talk more about that one. I think one of the ones that I've taken away today, for me, that was new and potentially concerning is the potential impact of increased utility bills for our schools, and the impact that might have on children and young people's SEND. There's going to be some real financial pressures on schools. Are there some unintended consequences that impact across the SEND system as a result of that?
Yeah, that's something that we hear in sort of normal times, is that schools struggling with the budgets that they have, being able to sustain the level of staffing. So that is really something worrying for people to think about. Yeah, so thanks for that. How about you, Janine? What are your sort of reflections on what you've heard from parents today? What do you think you're going to take away? What will you take back to the office, to colleagues?
I think for me a very significant mix between families that feel that they are collaborating with the school and other people that know their child well in a really productive way, where they feel listened to, and that they feel where one planning is an ongoing process, that there's a clear review and points to think about and good questions to ask. That was clear from a couple of families, which was really refreshing. But also thinking of maybe when that's not in place in a really clear way for families, where families have felt confused possibly or unheard by some of that involvement in the process. And I know that you're really passionate about one planning, and at the centre of that being the sort of collaborative focus. So that the takeaway bit for me was how we continue as a whole team, so my whole teams, to think about that voice of the family and the voice of the young person in the midst of one planning. What we're hearing, particularly for families at the end of a school day, and therefore what might we need to adjust during the school day to make that not as difficult or tricky for a family as well. So some really key points there.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you say, yeah, I'm passionate about one planning because I hear so many stories of people who are not very happy with the standard of one planning, and I think there's not one standard template that's being used across all schools, so the picture really varies from family to family, and yet it's so essential to getting support right for young people in their education setting. So yeah, well, thank you both very, very much for coming along today.
It's always a pleasure, Sue.
And before we finish, Ralph, I just wanted to ask you, so this is the third coffee morning you've now been to, and you've heard lots of stories from parents. What are you going to do with this information when you get back to County Hall?
So a lot of it is building on each of the individual meetings that I've been to. I've heard some very similar experiences from parents. I think the one that probably I will reflect on the most, and the one that needs really the most attention, is around lack of parental confidence sometimes in what support they're getting from their school. and then that impact across the SEND system. So if parents were more confident that one planning and the school offer was going to support them, we wouldn't have as many requests for education healthcare plans, and we wouldn't have such pressure on our teams in terms of identifying special school places. So the main one for me is how do we work with groups like Maze and with schools, the crucial partners there being schools and settings, on giving parents that increased confidence. And I think some of that is about schools' own confidence themselves. So I think the starting point is a conversation with schools, an honest and open conversation. What is it you feel you don't have in terms of knowledge and expertise that would help parents be more confident if you develop that? And maybe some more challenging conversations where schools perhaps don't want to develop that level of confidence because for them SEND is not a priority. So SEND needs to be everyone's priority. If we're going to have a strong education system in Essex, then it's absolutely dependent we've got a strong SEND system in Essex from all of our settings as well.
Yeah, no, I agree with you that I think that my reflections are that there isn't this standardised template for one planning. And I think I've made my views clear about the templates that have been previously available on the local offer. I don't think are really very useful because they're too lengthy and too wordy. Because with my teacher hat on, I know what teachers need is something simple and concise.
Keep it simple.
Exactly, but it needs to be very pupil focused, not provision focused. And some of the other conversations I've had with people working in schools is that the amount of training that they've received around writing good one plans and what they should look like has not been sufficient to enable them to provide that kind of standard of one planning. So, we at Maze have a template that we like to use. We share it with parents. We encourage parents to have a go at writing their own one plan so that they go along to meetings with their ask, in the hope that they see themselves as a useful resource to schools, not going to tell teachers what to do, but hopefully bringing the good energy to have a co-production and a joint conversation about one planning. But I suppose my final question to you is that what can you do to influence schools, where I know that many schools in Essex are academies, therefore not under local authority control. So how do you envision working with schools to make those kind of improvements?
So I think the most important one is the vast majority of schools do want to do the best they can. So it's getting into those schools. And we've got a meeting this afternoon, 2 meetings this afternoon. The first one is about workforce development across our teams and across schools teams. We're being asked by the professional associations for primary and secondary schools, how can you help us? So I think the door is open. It's just making sure that we've got the right resource, and we do have the opportunity to put some money into this at the moment to develop a really good outreach offer from special schools, from enhanced provisions, but also from mainstream schools that have got a really good send off of themselves. So the bit we can be is the link and the facilitator for all of that, and obviously helpfully provide some money in order to allow the system to do that work.
Yeah, that sounds good, and we'll look forward to hearing the updates about that. And Janine, final question for you then. Obviously, your job is focused very much around North East. And what are the kind of key themes that you think you're going to be taking back to your office, where you're going to think, okay, this is what we need to maybe improve or do something about within this quadrant?
So I think the biggest thing for me in terms of part of the team that are connected with the SEND service in North East is about communication, open communication. We know we don't always get that right, and just hearing from one family today who maybe weren't in a position to understand what we were trying to communicate with them as well, so giving that time and being very clear about what can be enabled to move things forward. I think that we just need to really focus on that. And then in terms of thinking about the developments which sort of link with what Ralph said as well, what we do know in terms of North East, but it's not just a North East issue, is that we've got more and more children and young people experiencing barriers to learning where anxiety might be in the mix. And there's lots of conversations around that and lots of work across Essex around that. But in North East, I think there's just a couple of take-backs for me about where can we evidence good practice and share that, where it does work well for a family that's really struggling to support their child to engage in learning as well. So there's still some take-backs from today around that as well, and how can you improve that?
Well, that's great. Sounds like it's been definitely a useful morning for us to be able to speak to you both. I really appreciate you taking the time to come down here and speak to people face to face. Face-to-face conversation is always preferable, isn't it, than a curtly worded email and so on. So yeah, thank you both so much for your time today,
it's great to
and
be here, so
we
thank
look
you.
forward to keeping the conversation going.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you.